Hi, I'm Tara. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. However, a woman after me did not survive. I'm here to tell you a little bit about my story because it may be changing soon. I was 17 when I met my abuser. By all accounts and purposes, it seemed like he had his life together and was working to build a good life. He had previously worked in the Air Force and had moved on into a civilian job working as a police officer, and had been going to college as well. I became pregnant early in the relationship, and that's when the abuse began with me. He began to beat me on a regular basis. He often enjoyed trying to choke me to where you would just be afraid if you were going to be able to take your next breath. I've been raped. I was raped while being choked. I was also raped at gunpoint. One of those times was 2 weeks after I had delivered my oldest son. I had a loaded gun put in my mouth and was raped off and on throughout the whole night. That was probably the scariest day of my life up until that point. I was scared that I wasn't going to survive. And I was also scared about what was going to happen to my baby. He was just right in the other room. And I was worried that he'd wake up crying and need fed or something like that that might set off my former abuser. Instead, thankfully, he did sleep through the night. But I was worried that if I was murdered, I wasn't sure what was going to happen to him. I've also had my life threatened on multiple occasions. He ended up abusing my babies when they were 1 and 2. He beat my oldest son, who was 2, because he was potty training and he had an accident in his pants. My 1-year-old son was scared to go to him after that because he had just watched his brother be beaten. So then he ended up beating my 1-year-old. He pled guilty to domestic violence towards my babies because of the evidence that I provided the system when I filed charges. He was put on probation without much more of any type of sentence for the child abuse. While on probation, he assaulted another woman. He was found guilty of this assault. All the while, he's not leaving me or my sons alone. He shows up to my place of employment. He was showing up to our place of worship. He was also showing up to our home and making threats. We had civil protection orders and we had restraining orders at different times throughout the process, but that didn't stop him. He wasn't receiving any type of harsh sentence through the justice system. I learned of his violent history after he started abusing me. He had abused his first wife. He had also gotten into trouble while working in the Air Force and also as a civilian police officer because he pulled guns on people off duty. So this is a man with violent history. And it's a man who keeps receiving leniency from the justice system. So that combination doesn't work out very well with making any changes. And he continued his violent behavior to the point where he actually murdered the next woman. He brutally murdered her. She was bruised from head to toe. They said that her injuries were caused by punching, kicking, stomping, and strangulation. 18 of her ribs were broken. Her liver was lacerated. She had head trauma. And one of the things that got me is he did all this when they had a baby right there with them. So she lived my worst nightmare. I had actually found out that he had murdered her because I received a letter stating he was coming back to get us. But the letter was stamped by a detention center. So I called the detention center stating that I was in fear of our lives, trying to find out what was going on. And they put me through to the prosecutor's office because they said that they knew that they would want to talk to me. The prosecutor wanted to know all of the different types of abuse that I endured, and wanted those descriptions, and wasn't able to tell me much about the case at that point because they said that they needed to use me as a similar transaction witness in the case, because the things that I was describing as having endured is how he murdered Martha Brown. I received a death threat right after I was listed as a similar transaction witness. So they actually put me on hold, on standby, to use if needed, but they were able to get a conviction without me, although I was willing to help. This is a man who would look at my babies at 1 and 2 or younger and ask me what I thought would happen if he would punch them in the face as hard as he could. This is a man who said he got an adrenaline rush when he would beat me. This is also a man that would talk about how his hands would literally start sweating as he was driving down the road because he would have such an urge to kill the random people that were walking down the street. This is not somebody that I am comfortable with being put in a work release program so that he's transitioned back into society, but that's what's being suggested. He has been recommended to become part of this work release program, which will transition him back into society and have him walking the same streets as your mother, your wife, your sister, your daughters. This man has recently looked me up to see where I work. LinkedIn lets you know these things. This is also a man that has recently sent a letter to my home to make sure we knew that he's aware of where we live. I've received all of these letters after I left him. But yet he's being considered to be okay to be transitioned back to society. If you would like to tell me a little bit about your story, I would love to hear from you. I would also love for somebody to take a stand with me. It's time for us to take a stand against a justice system that is so lenient on these violent criminals.